I'm Jillian Chu, and I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Religion and Philosophy at the Hong Kong Baptist University. And I'll be facilitating this event today, which is titled A Dialogue on the Ethics of ChatGPT at Schools. So some Zoom logistics for those of you who are online. And if you are HKBU student, please edit your name to student number and name for Siow records. And I'm sure if you came in this way, then you would have signed in. But if you haven't, please do that. And if you're online, please keep your audio muted. That just helps keeping the noise down. And if there's anything you're unsure of, like if there's like tech issues or whatnot, just message us on the chat and our facilitators will help you out. So thank you so much for the Center for Applied Ethics and the Department of Religion and Philosophy for hosting this event. And a bit about the Center. The Center for Applied Ethics commits to developing world-leading research on practical concerns. And the center addresses emerging issues facing the global society. And if you're interested in what we're doing in the center, feel free to reach out to Dr. Benedict Chan, our center director, who's like here today, and for details and collaboration opportunities. So a bit about today's event. We'll be having a dialogue about ethical use of large language models for the future of education. And the rundown for today looks like this. And we'll first have individual presentations from each of our speakers. I'll introduce them before they're presenting. And then there'll be around 25 minutes of panel discussion. And then another 25 minutes we'll be taking questions from the floor and from both online and on campus. As to asking questions, when the speakers are presenting, you are welcome to jot down your thoughts in these different ways. So if you're online, just type it in the chat and our facilitators will be monitoring to make sure your questions are addressed. And if you have a question in person, at the end of the Q&A, we'll be passing out mics, and your participation is highly welcomed. So without further ado, I'm sure you're here to listen to our speakers and not me giving out logistics. Our first speaker is Dr. Levi Mahonri Checketts, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Hong Kong Baptist University. Dr. Checketts is originally from the United States of America, and he taught at the Holy Names University, St. Mary's College of California, and Santa Clara University. His research interest includes Catholic social ethics, continental philosophy, and science and technology studies. And Dr. Checketts will be talking about large language models as how education might need tool reevaluation because of the existence of that. And I'll pass the time to Dr. Checketts.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. I'm going to move this in case people want to, I don't know, people can see my face. Can you still see me online? I think so. Camera's over here. Okay. So to begin with, I have a couple of thoughts. This topic, of course, a lot of people are interested in. A lot of people want to know, what should we think about this thing? So it's a little bit difficult because the topic itself is very fresh and it's hard to know exactly what to say. So I have a couple of things that seem to me to be pertinent, important points to understand as we think about AI and education, and then a few ethical problems that I think persist and how this changes our thinking about education. So to begin with, there don't seem to be really a lot of good uses of ChatGPT in terms of how it can be used for tech education. I'm happy to be corrected on this point. Just in my research, I've seen it as a lot of people talking about using it to offload some of their work. It can write for me, it can send emails for me and so forth. But this means that the communication you send is not your own communication anymore. So this leads to an important problem. Who takes responsibility for the communication? And this gets to the core of the second problem, which I'll talk about, which is, of course, cheating. In essence, when I produce a piece of research, when I prepare lecture notes, when I offer students feedback, I take responsibility for what I'm communicating to them. But with large language models, I am not creating that communication, though I may sign off on it. So the best solution here, the best solution I've heard people talk about is using it as a foil for generating ideas, for proof texting their work or proofreading their work, debating, creating arguments that they can debate against, generating stock exams, and so forth. But this isn't actual feedback. So what is it really? What are we producing? In each case, it removes the teacher's responsibility in the name of production of some simulacra or some arbitrary metric masquerading as education. The second point then is, of course, the cheating problem. Namely, we're stuck, and the problem here is that we're stuck in this medieval paradigm of apprenticeship. In ethics, for example, it's common to assign a brief paper contrasting moral approaches of utilitarianism and deontology. And it's so formulaic, so basic of an assignment for demonstrating understanding that it almost invites cheating. And I say this as an ethicist who's assigned this kind of paper repeatedly. Now, obviously, we'll need new models for assessment, but also ought to ask, what is our goal in education? So this leads to two problems or two obstacles. The first is education is important for training people to do certain types of work. Scientists, for example, do need to know how to write. Educators need to know how to do this stuff as well. People who are involved in education need to understand what's going on. But secondly, they need to understand how to assess critical writing. So on this front, with cheating, large language models aren't anything really new. I've had to deal with cheating in various forms in the past. Essay mills, summaries or copying or paraphrasing from Wikipedia or SparkNotes, running a paper through Google Translate a few times to try to make it seem different, saving it in a form where Turnitin cannot recognize the text, and so forth. These are all examples of cheating I've discovered in past years. So large language models only offer a new form of this, and ultimately, this seems to be, though, the death knell of the form essay. The greater problem, I think, is the false information that LLMs can produce, and they are often trusted as if they are creating objective information when it's merely a matter of predictive text generation. They don't necessarily create information that's true, just information that seems true. There's a problem then for programmers generally. If you don't know how to write a good program, you don't know if the machine wrote a good program. If you don't know how to write a good essay, you won't know if the machine's paper is very good either. So learning to write well has at least the function of teaching what is good writing and what isn't. And so there is a need for students to know how to write, which requires writing, of course. Now, the bigger problem, though, is pedagogy. I think I don't have a clear idea of what the future of pedagogy needs to be, but I will say that the old model of lecture and term paper is woefully inadequate at this point, and we need to admit this. The technologized solutions that are often offered of employing silos, quantifiable benchmarks, inundating students with edutainment disguised as edutech seems also poorly conceived, as it tends towards what Herbert Marcuse calls one-dimensional thinking, that there's a specific answer, and that answer is going to conform with specific technological goals. In my own experience as a student and my experience as a teacher, education reaches its highest potential when students and teachers engage in it as a conversation, where neither side knows exactly what the end is until the end is reached. But I've only experienced this in seminars or courses where students were in the class out of a genuine interest and not to meet requirements. So this leads to the problem of GE courses. GE courses require an inherent disciplinary function to them. Students must be taught to read, must be taught to think, must be taught to communicate in a way that allows them to understand to some degree what has been already expounded and to begin to develop their own critique and interests. For the humanities, this is necessary before we get into the deeper tasks of reading, reflecting, and creating our own ideas. Of course, even if many of the humanities can move away from this rote production, other disciplines have their own ways of pedagogy and their own needs as well. Thomas Kuhn once argued that the physical sciences are thoroughly dogmatic. One has to know the exact theorems, demonstrate high precision and accuracy, and align with the right thinkers to succeed generally. If you're espousing alchemy, you're not going to succeed as a chemist. I'm sorry. How do we then teach students to develop their own thoughts, engage in the material, and produce clear ideas without facilitating the temptation to cheat? In my mind, the best example I've ever come across was one of the educators at my PhD alma mater, Judith Berling, And her strategy of teaching was this. She had students write the same paper over and over throughout the term, starting, of course, with a tentative thesis and tentative arguments. Very brief, very uncertain. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm going to write about. Over the course of the term, students would develop their thesis in engagement with the conversation emerging from their course. They may reverse positions, they may change ideas. They will certainly change what their arguments are and how they defend them. By the end of the course, what they have is a single final paper instead of, as I've had to assign in previous jobs, about 4 smaller papers and a large one. And this final paper demonstrates their development of thought throughout the semester. They actually have a chance because they're rewriting the paper. They're addressing arguments they made before and fixing them. They have a chance to really develop their thought in a way that shows progression and engagement rather than just rote memorization. I think this model or something like it offers an interesting way forward for pedagogy. It subverts the form essay model. It allows dynamic teaching and learning. It engages students in their own interests, and it makes education a form of direct engagement. But there are obvious problems with this. It defies quantitative models of assessment, both within the classroom. Can you create a rubric for a paper like this? And outside of the classroom, how does one evaluate the effectiveness of the course ultimately? It can only be possible with a low number of students, a low student to faculty ratio, or with many well-trained TAs who can give substantial feedback in helping students develop their thoughts and improve their arguments. It most likely requires students to take fewer courses so that they can engage more deeply with the individual courses. In short, it looks more like a traditional liberal arts education than a lot of the directions that education has been moving towards. So ultimately, question is, what should our policy be? I don't see it being very helpful, ChatGPT and other LLMs being particularly useful for research, although I do see a potential use for its simulation of English writing to be helpful in displacing editors to some degree and helping, especially in a place like Hong Kong, where many people may feel a little uncertain about their English grammar and spelling. It can be very useful for checking that. But faculty who use this for generating research should have to disclose that. And I think to some degree, such research should be much more carefully vetted, both to avoid liability on our part and to discourage dishonest practices. Because LLMs do not generate accurate text, but predictive text, there's no guarantee that what you get from an LLM generated research paper is going to be anything close to accurate. And so there needs to be a lot more careful vetting if we're going to use this for research. We can ban it for student assessments, but the question is whether we have to define a clear line on this. Do we allow students to use it to fix grammatical and spelling problems? And if we do, how do we know when they are using it the right way or not? That leads to this open question about how do we determine what's the proper usage. So the greater problem in this, I think, is it seems to fit in most clearly. One, the model, the paradigm it fits in most clearly is one where education can be gamed. My suggestion then is we uproot the status quo of mechanistic pedagogical reproduction. Students should learn to write, yes, but the form essay does not demonstrate learning the content as much as it demonstrates learning the form essay. How do we make up for this? Our school is committed to whole person education, and our current educational strategy is moving toward transdisciplinary education. And here I think we have a great potential to reimagine what assessment looks like. Can a chemistry student outline an ethnographic study on what goes on in the lab? Can a religious studies student use VR to model liturgical practice? Can a literature student write a story that explores philosophical themes with some degree of subtlety? In all of these cases, LLMs could actually serve a useful tool for generating content which the students themselves will need to curate, filter, organize, and correct. The temptation to see LLMs as heralding the imminent demise of the education system assumes that the education is measurable in terms of quantifiable production. Philosophy of education has fought this leveling down for decades, but the current crisis forces us to really reconsider how to truly educate. In the end, we come back to the age-old conflict between so-called practical education and the Aristotelian sense of Sophia, wisdom for wisdom's sake. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Checketts. Our next speaker is Professor Ahti-Veikko, who's a professor at the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Hong Kong Baptist University. Professor Pietarinen is a Finnish philosopher, and he previously worked at the University of Helsinki and Tallinn's University of Technology. His research interests include logic, language and information, philosophy of science, cognition, artificial intelligence, and more. So Professor Pietarinen is going to show us an experiment of ChatGPT 4.
All right, thank you very much. I think it's very important to everybody to understand how these systems work and to be able to do things technically right in the first place, and then we can discuss about the right kinds of and ethical kinds of uses. I think these are here to stay. They're not going away. We have to learn to use these in the right kind of way. So I was thinking about one experiment. So I was finalizing this just before this. So, you know, this is so new, all these developments, and there are new emerging competencies in these language models coming up every hour, right? You know, tomorrow this will look a bit different than this morning. So what I was doing is that I checked how well GPT-4 is grading student essays, and as the data I was using course essays from this semester. I just got one of the latest ones today. Thanks for the students, and apologies if your essay is here. I changed the titles and I swiped them around, so you will not be able to identify or match the grades with the essay itself. But I choose a random sample, and it's only 8 here in the beginning, 70%, and then I first let the GPT-4 to grade them, and then I prompted GPT-4. I primed it with the rubric that I was using, and before all of this, I was grading these papers myself, and then I some results. Okay, so I asked, please grade the following student paper. Okay, it gives you that B, and gives you know, pretty detailed reasons why. And the second one here, grade B plus. Okay, I'm not going to show you the you don't need to look at the details of here. This you can read. By the way, you can make the screen larger at, you know, home screens if it's a bit too small. Third one here. Okay, fourth one. At this point, I asked actually compare and justify the assessment of the previous 4. And here you have to be quite careful about these, what, you know, linguists would call indexicals, so that you are pointing from the language to the right kinds of other places in the language. It didn't understand that. It cannot compare, doesn't know exactly. Compare and justify your assessment of the previous 4 papers, and then it gets, you know, comparison. It summarizes what it has suggested, and so on. So 5th one is here, 6th one is here, and 7th one is here. Yeah. Okay. All right. It's like this. Okay. And the 8th one is here. Okay. Here's an essay, by the way, where the ChatGPT causes more harm than good. Okay. At this point, I reached the limits of the cap for GPT-4 is now 25 prompts every 3 hours. So this slows down the process. You know, it pushes you to the coffee break quite often. So summary is here. GPT-4 gave these grades for 8 papers. These are my grades here. 50% are exactly the same letter grades. The 4 others are a bit different from 2, 3, and even 4 steps. One of them 4 letter grade steps away from. So that's okay. That's interesting. And then I primed GPT-4 with the rubric that I was using. Okay, so I gave this rubric. The rubric is here. It has 5 categories and ideas: organization, support, style, and mechanics. And so it actually then summarizes my rubric here. This is GPT-4's summary of the rubric that I'm using. It does that without asking, really. You know, so is this okay to use this one? Yeah, that's right one. Then, okay, let's do the same thing again. Create the same essays with the rubric. Pay attention to this rubric. You have to actually give this rubric every time, so it's prompt so that it doesn't use somebody else's rubric. It might do that, or it might confabulate a rubric. It might hallucinate. So you have to each prompt to, make sure that it gets the right reference, right indexicals, right information there. So you do that, yeah, and okay, so it evaluates these essays again, and it gives the reasons. By the way, you can regenerate the responses, and I was doing 3 regenerations of the same essay, and I was checking for the consecutive replies. So it typically gives the same letter grade, but it sometimes changes it a little bit. So it might change. So what I'm using is the average if there is any change in the grades. And so here they are, and there will be 8 of those, and then the results. So I will add this now to the table here. So here is the first one is what we had before. So there are 4 same grades that I was using, and here is the GPT primed with the rubric that I was using in grading. It gives 3 are exactly the same, and 2 of them are different from the first one. And so what we get is 6 out of 8 matches are exactly the same letter grades, and this is very interesting to see that it is doing like this. It's also interesting, where it differs, and here is particularly one where it actually changes by using the rubric. It re-evaluates the same essay from B- to D+, and I was giving B-. And so then I would give this essay B-. Defend your grading of the previous essay. I appreciate your perspective on the essay grade. I will defend my grading based on the rubric provided, and then gives its reasons. However, I understand that grading is subjective, and other perspectives might focus on different aspects. Your grade might emphasize the essay's strengths or view the weaknesses as less significant. Okay, so this table here, I think that's what we want to run a better statistical analysis of this and get more data and more inputs, and I would like to do that then later. But it's roughly below 2 letter grades deviation between the model and the instructors. Grades here on the average. So that's what we get out of this. Okay, then I asked, can ChatGPT be used to grade student essays? Okay, well, it says, I can analyze and understand text, grammar, syntax, coherence, argument, quality, but there are these topics like subjectivity, creativity, originality, contextual understanding, biases, and so forth. So this is the early experiment, and this raises some thoughts about how to use this. I think it mentioned Levi mentioned the process writing, and this might be working as a self-tutoring kind of system where it's not that the instructors would offload their work to something else using this. I mean, it could do it in some ways. Is it ethical to do it, and which way you should do it? We all need to think about that. But this could be done by using this process. A student could use this to analyze own essay before submitting and reiterating this, and maybe the assessment task could be try to achieve B+ from your essay, starting whatever it is where you start with. And if you don't get B+ first, do it, iterate it as long as the system gives you B+, then instructor evaluates, it's probably going to get better. The quality of the essay is going to get better and better. So we can use this. I think we can use this for learning and quality of learning in these kinds of ways to improve things, rather than thinking that this would somehow be banned or even considered to be problematic. So it has amazing emergent capabilities, that's we are witnessing all the time. So it's good to look at the details of these and to see some really interesting things happening in this process. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pietarinen. Our third speaker is Dr. Rachel Siow Robertson, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Hong Kong Baptist University. Dr. Robertson grew up in Hong Kong and worked as a director of studies in the philosophy at St. Catherine's College in Cambridge and a research associate at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. Her research interests includes philosophical anthropology, and Dr. Robertson will offer some suggestions on how educators can support and encourage students through changes of ChatGPT. Let's welcome Dr. Robertson.
Great, thank you. Thank you to our previous two speakers as well. I'm approaching this more from thinking about educators, I guess not just in university, but through conversations with school teachers as well that I've had. So hopefully it does add a little bit to what we've heard already. Just a word about my background in terms of research. So my thinking is really about how technology helps us form our beliefs, our values, our characters, and also how social structures interact with that formation. And just from that, I would like to just raise two questions to think about for educators. The first question that I think is really helpful is, do we as educators understand a bit about what LLMs, generative AI platforms are doing? So I think, especially in earlier stages of people talking about it, but even now, I think often educators have misunderstood what these technologies are doing. So I've heard people talking about it like it's a really advanced database search, it's a better Google, or it has access to all information ever, or it's producing responses magically without any human input. And all of these are wrong, and wrong in really significant ways. So I think one question that we need to think about is our understanding of AI, these types of AI, because it will really inform any answers that we have to questions of use. And if we don't understand it, we can't equip our students to use and to understand these cases of AI as well. And I get it, it is complex. I mean, I'm not a technologist myself. There are things that I don't understand, but what's good about this moment is that there are a lot of really good resources that do discuss it. And we can also take this moment to start discussions like the one that we're having across many different universities in Hong Kong around the world. We might not understand it, but maybe our colleagues, maybe someone else does. So there are a load of good online resources just explaining, why is it not just a database search? Why doesn't it have all information? Why does it do these hallucinations? And I think it's worth equipping ourselves on these things so that we can be clear to our students, right? We can be clear, of course, in our syllabi and our rubrics. I think that was so important even this semester to already set out what are we expecting from our students in their use of these things, what's allowed and what's not. But also more medium, longer term, how are we going to teach students about what these things do? And I think there's loads of good things that we as educators already have in our toolkit. So things like using all of our senses, I think especially for younger students, that can be really useful. Using lots of disciplines as well to approach AI. So that could look like, showing how human decisions are at work, even in seemingly objective information sorting, from maybe how books are organized in a library, right? Thinking about classification there, to even the presentation of statistics in mathematics. So I saw a really good example of teaching kids about social media, using people running from one classroom to another. So really making it physical, making them think about, yeah, if I send a message over there, I don't see the impact, but it's happening. And then checking in on that classroom later. I think we could do something like that when it comes to try to breaking down some of these complex processes that are at work. And I think another thing that we can be doing is being specific about AI as well. So Perhaps instead of letting our students loose on ChatGPT, which is very generic, it pretends to do everything. There are more specific AI chatbots which do more specific tasks, which are maybe easier for our students to get their heads around, or maybe for us as well. So an AI tool that summarizes journal articles, for example, so that does do the searching and summarizing, or a counter argument generator or something like that, where the parameters are just a bit more set. So that's sort of my first question. Do we understand it's complex, but there are resources and there are ways of approaching it for ourselves and for our students. The second big question I wanted to raise was, who's in control, when it comes to the use of these kinds of AI in education? I think this is a really important question to ask, because maybe it already feels like it's technology that has the power, right? AI chatbots, they have this apparent objectivity, they're efficient, they have this authority when they write from the first person, weirdly. But maybe you also think, oh, it's the tech companies, right? They have all our personal data every time we type something into a box. They have the ability to prioritize particular perspectives and set the guidelines, choose the data sets that they train these things on. They can disregard any human environmental costs when they train and upkeep AI. And maybe also those just generally with tech skills. I was reading about how they can, build secret instructions to AI in their websites, which then shape chatbot responses. So maybe it feels like, those with the technology, they have the power. And that's true and important to acknowledge and remember when we use these things. But I do want to remind us that those of us making decisions within the education system also have power in how we approach teaching and assessment. And some students, I think especially those perhaps with more financial resources, they already had the power to pay somebody to write their essay for them, to get extra tutoring. All of those things were existing inequalities that we should have been aware of beforehand. So at every level, I think we do need to we might start off with particular motivations, beliefs, and values, but because of these power structures and what's valued within them, we can end up pursuing other maybe harmful aims. And so we end up with questions like, why is it worth reading and summarizing and citing and posing problems if AI can do a more efficient job? And on this issue of motivation, I do want to note that I don't think we can talk about education, any issue in education, without noting that there is a huge mental health crisis amongst young people, especially in Hong Kong. So students may be coming into our classroom driven by perfectionism, overwork, low confidence about their language and communication, and maybe lots of fears about jobs and the future. So that's a big question, right? Who has the power when it comes to use of these technologies? And just to finish off, I just want to mention that I think we can really lean into the relational elements of the education system to counter some of these concerns about power and motivation. So, of course, we as educators, no matter our role, we won't have control over all of these different structures I've just mentioned. But I think there's ways of being in on the game with our students, giving them the power to play the educational game, the job market game, without losing their values. So what would that look like? I think it's showing them and setting tasks that have particular values, right? So value safety. Don't make students give up personal information just because you want them to use technology. Value the process. We've heard this already. Show that thinking is not just about the end result. Put in structures which reward care and truth-telling alongside efficiency. That could look like what we praise and reward. Do we reward curiosity? Do we reward students who have the wisdom to take a break? Do we reward collaboration, not just competition, critical thinking, not just criticizing? And that could look like activities which reflect those values, like drafting and redrafting in class, like Levi mentioned, reflecting on discussions in class, group annotations. Yeah, just in general, do we demonstrate that each student matters in their particular nexus of relationships? And that life is more than just whatever an AI or a tech company can scrape and calculate and define, or maybe within our grading systems as well. And I think this connects to activities people already do, like service learning, field trips, practical support like bursaries for food and shelter and technology. And last value that I wanted to just mention is valuing experience and storytelling, right? By allowing for diverse media beyond essays, maybe as assessment outputs, helping students to identify problems and futures which matter to them within disciplines, and providing inspiring examples of people who've used AI to do that. So yeah, I think we must understand first what AI does, and also consider who's in control when we use AI to use AI well. And I hope if we're clear about those kind of questions, like what's the point of asking questions and what's the point of doing an essay, we'll be able to use AI well. So we'll be able to provide good prompts and assess their responses too. Great, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Now we'll move on to the panel discussion session, and I'd like to invite our three speakers to come out at the front. We're going to switch cameras so that you can see our speakers. Oh. Can we pass them the mics as well? Thanks. You're not seeing it right now, but imagine it's there. I was browsing through LinkedIn yesterday, and our HKBU Language Center posted a info sheet on ChatGPT. I appreciate how when you do see it, I appreciate like how small the characters are, and so like if you want to, you can download it on LinkedIn. I think it's like the first thing that they posted. It's an info sheet on ChatGPT and some prompt engineering 101 that's inspired by Dr. Simon Ho Wang. And so I was kind of wondering if you can have some, like, if you are able to share some thoughts, or like how do you, because I think Levi started with like what is inherently yours that you're creating as you're using ChatGPT. And so like how are knowing like how to write prompts, like as Artie was kind of demonstrating using prompts to like grade, like how is writing prompts your own or like not your own work? And like if I'm like really good at writing prompts and getting ChatGPT to do things, is that not some kind of skill that I have? Who would like to start? Yeah.
Well, it definitely is a skill that we have to learn, sooner than later, to get things right. First of all, because this is a thing that learns itself all the time, and it's going to get these answers as its new pre-training data anytime in the future. Not quite yet. It's not instant feedback loop, but whatever is being provided will at some point be used to train that model further. So anything we do, anything you think about doing now will influence the future state of those models, what they are going to be like, because almost everyone is going to be using them soon in the future. So it's better start thinking now and thinking about what to prompt, what to write, how to do it in a responsible way, because it will learn from all of you. You are teachers, every one of you, all the students using that will also be a teacher of the future, teacher of what the future is going to be like. And whatever you think about that thing right now matters for that future state. But that's the way I see it, is that prompt engineering is an immediate topic to be trained to everyone and to learn this thing in the right responsible way.
I think I'm hesitant to use the language of the AI, the large language models communicating, writing, because it's a production of text which we interpret, which we read, and we can verify if it's correct or not. So there's a degree to which whether we affirm what came out or not, it's entirely based on our ability to interpret what has been generated from it. So this is like if you were to look, I think that direction, maybe, I'm not sure exactly because there's no windows here, you will see a rock formation, which we call Lion Rock, which is not generated, as far as I know, by any any intentional being, right? But it looks like a lion to us. This is a phenomenon, it's called pareidolia, where we see things that look like something to us. And when we read something that's generated by a large language model, it looks like something which is communicated to us. So in this, we should be mindful that the computer is not communicating. It is providing what is verified by training models to be accepted by human participants. So we have to keep this in mind. I think if we do that, then when we can think about being a content engineer, thinking of this as a sort of tool that we can use to produce something which others will read, others will perceive, others will experience as a form of communication. You can think of this then as different art technologies have changed the way artists create art, right? That figuring out how to generate computer generated graphics is very different from learning how to sculpt, or very different from learning how to paint frescoes or something. So in this way, it will be a different form of creation, but the creation still belongs to the engineer, the person who's doing it. And I think this leads to I think Ahti's right that we have to learn how to do this correctly, but it does still lead to this problem that this is something that we have to be mindful that what we're doing is still a machine is producing something which we then verify as being meaningful or not being meaningful, being a bunch of gibberish. And maybe we can even engineer that. Maybe that would be a productive use of it, creating nonsense that we can just, show as a sort of artistic expression.
I guess. Yeah, that's better. I think maybe two things. Yeah, first, I think if you're asking questions well, then yes, you can take ownership of it. But I think anyone who's been in an academic conference would know asking a question is really hard, like asking a good question. Sure, we've all had moments where we've had, or maybe as a student, when there's a sort of participation part and you have to ask a question. It's hard. It's hard to come up with a good question that elicits a helpful and fruitful response. So there's that. So there is a skill in it that we should recognize and we need to cultivate. But I guess the question is, how do we cultivate it? And what goes into a process of thought, of forming a question and then assessing the answer? And yeah, I'm inclined to think it goes back to those very traditional skills that we teach in universities and schools, forming questions and answering them and assessing the response. Those are very basic skills that come across all disciplines that need to be learned. I guess the other thing is I would be hesitant to just use an AI tool to formulate a response or to help you to come up with a position or something like that. There are many tools that we can use to come to our opinions, to form a position. I would be hesitant to just use one, especially because we don't, there's sort of incomplete data, incomplete training. There's different parameters that human beings have set on things like ChatGPT. I would be hesitant to give myself over completely, even if my questions are really good. And so I hope students would be hesitant as well to just give their thinking over completely, even if they feel like they can ask really good questions. You might want to have different sources. You might want to talk to other people. It's okay to depend on different things. I think we depend on things all the time to come to our beliefs, but to just have one tool or one source, that's a concern for me too.
This is a really important question of, I think it was interesting, is the question of objectivity. What is actually the objective criteria here to assess let's say the abilities of reasoning and coming up with correct conclusions about anything? And we have to remember that these large language models, I mean, just very, very recently, they have learned something about language that probably human beings didn't understand before. It had learned logic of the language. It has learned the semantic syntax of language in the way that we have a model that became a new Aristotle. It learned the syllogism by itself. Nobody told that. It learns probably a stronger version of logic. We don't understand it well enough, but it did that. It's better at reasoning than humans. So what is the question of objectivity there? And it's learned, and it's getting better and better all the time. So is it that when, if suppose that would be used to, let's say, check the grades or grading or whatever it is, the task at hand, what is the benchmark? Is it the human with all the biases and noise? And, we know that it matters whether you grade your student papers in the morning or late at the evening. You know that judges give longer sentences to the accused if he had just had lunch. We know that doctors give you better referrals to a cancer screening if you go there first thing in the morning. We know that this happens all the time. So when you are at that 87th student paper at the end of the semester, who is more objective? A machine that never gets tired and gives you very detailed feedback on the exact form of the logic and reasoning that's going on in the paper, or you who's just struggling to stay awake?
I do sometimes wonder if the machine in itself, it's learning our habit of just being really tired after lunch, because we're teaching it as well. And so there might be some sort of learning models in there. But let's move on to the next topic. I'm so sorry, the writing is really small. It's a press release, so it's entirely no frills. But if you're interested, there's a link I've put in over there. And also you can just search ledge code ChatGPT, and that's the first thing that comes up. And so I'll summarize it for you though. It's a question raised by the Honorable Priscilla Leung to the Secretary of Education, Dr. Choi Yuk-lin, at the Legislative Council on the 29th of March, 2023. And so it talks about in Dr. Choi's response, talks a bit about like how the University Grants Commission and the Research Grants Council thinks about ChatGPT. And it does, first of all, talks about how there's thoughts on the Hong Kong Baptist University working on introducing relevant guidelines shortly. And second, the focus is more on like preventing cheating, such as like, this is what Dr. Choi said, in view of the development of generative AI, the universities will monitor the non-compliant use of technology through various means, such as adoption of more advanced plagiarism detection software and addition of integrity declaration clauses, and adjusting also methods to reflect student learning. And so I'm thinking in your response to like, how would you respond to like the UGC and the RGC stance on ChatGPT? And because the way they've kind of talked about it is mainly like the sort of preventive academic dishonesty or encouraging academic integrity. And the way they see it, it's more like adverse and needs risk management and not so much opportunity for ways of like different ways of learning. And so how would you like interact with the Education Bureau and the way they've kind of phrased it?
I think this is something that I thought about a lot when the pandemic began, because suddenly everybody, at least in the United States, where I was teaching at the time, everybody was online, and I think last year, a year ago, we were all online as well, and it becomes very hard to monitor students for exams and other assignments when they're online. So if you're playing this sort of arms race, do we build in Moodle and other edutech companies have these devices to freeze your browser and all of these other things to try to mitigate cheating and monitor keystrokes and all this. And at some point, you're just the university is pouring all sorts of money into these programs, and the students are paying for these programs, and it just becomes the only people who benefit from these are the tech companies, right? Ultimately, there's this kind of problem that if we try to address cheating by having better Turnitin plagiarism detection software, then there will be some other way around it, and you're playing a losing game. I think the problem is we really do have to think about what is being conveyed through education from beginning of primary school up until to tertiary school. where we're saying to a student, here's your grade. This is the point value you have. Many students, I think for many students, it would be good if we just turned to a pass-fail system for many students. And that way they don't have to worry and wring their hands about what their CGPA is. But of course, the problem with this is if they do want to go on to graduate studies, and they may not know that when they enter, right? They may realize in third or fourth year, hey, actually, I like this field. I want to study more. Then this does become a problem. Like, how do you determine the student should have a CGPA of 4.0 or 3.8 or whatever? So there is a kind of balance that needs to go on here. But I think ultimately we have to then start really saying, how do we create assessments that the students do not just look for ways to cheat? So when the pandemic began, I gave students just open book exams, use whatever resources you want. Only thing is you have an hour to do this. So if you are poring over trying to find the answer for each question, you're going to run out of time. That's the only thing that's going to hurt you here. But that's the kind of thing where at that point, the students have to motivate themselves to say, I need to know this stuff. Otherwise, when the exam comes, if I can't find it, I'm going to fail totally, right? If I can vaguely remember it, then I can look it up. If I can remember when we talked about this, I might be able to go through my notes. But if I don't have any idea, I'm just going to waste my time. So we've got to start thinking about, I think Rachel said this well in her talk, how do we create these structures that motivate students to, that reward them for creative and productive actions, rather than just trying to police cheating. Because when we're just policing cheating, it's just a lose-lose game for everybody. We're spending more time, they're spending more time, we're spending more money. Nobody wins from this.
This goes usually back to the question of what are the universities for? And universities, they are institutes for learning. And it matters less how that learning takes place. It matters less whether you are self-tutoring yourself. That's great if you can do it. Sometimes those are the best students. They use whatever means are just to train themselves to become better and better. And, marvelous new tools for self-tutoring here. Maybe you want to get 15 cycles of feedback from the system, and if you reach the B+, then you pass that assignment. And teacher might just, verify you passed that assignment. You taught yourself how to become better in writing. And in a way, this goes back to the very early ideas of university. And it used to be the case where it was more qualitative. It used to be the case where, you needed to study certain material. You got the book. There were such wonderful things as books. And then you had some wonderful things like oral examinations. So you might just question students, a couple of questions, and that would, give you a pass on that part. And this, it's not, in some sense, it's not rocket science. It's not that, it's like, going into that. Of course, agree completely that it's time to reorient trying to trace back the good old idea of the universities, that they are institutes for learning, and much less so for various other things, such as gradings and evading errors and mistakes. More qualitative, more interactive, more things happening in the classroom, participations, performances, presentations, face to face. That's going back to many of those.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just those two questions I raised that need to be put into the syllabus, to be put into the education system. I think that number one, that we are teaching students about what these new technologies are, what they do, that they have a good understanding of it. So I think that will go towards eliminating some of the crude uses of it that are most common now. I think I haven't really seen many good uses of it. I think students have just been saying, write me this essay. And there are better uses for it. And if they knew that it's just making stuff up and then the references don't exist, I don't think that they would be so tempted to use it, for example. And then the second question about power and motivation that comes within different power structures, I think that is a really important one for people who are forming the education system to think about. What are we rewarding? What are we measuring? What kind of activities cultivate a student who will use it well, rather than just giving over ownership of their work and their thinking to a particular tool.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide? Thanks. And so a final discussion point before we open up the floor is about AI chatbots in China, developed in mainland China. There are quite a lot. So there's Baidu's Ernie bot, just to name a few, Alibaba's Tongyi Qianwen, and Tencent's 混元模型, and Huawei's 盘古模型. And so like, do you have some thoughts or like views or predictions on like how AI chatbots are being both regulated and developed in mainland China?
Yeah, it's yeah. We don't know the technicalities of those. On a whole, if you look at the business environment, it is the race to the bottom, and that's what's taking place. You know, there is this Moloch that is you know, the danger all the time, that, you know, we are this multipolar trap of, you know, the game theory dilemma of whoever gets there first is going to win the race, and what, but eventually everyone loses out because of this. You just have to generate a model that would somehow respond to the needs of the majority of the population. And let's face it, most of the people who are going to use this are not necessarily very sophisticated users of these tools. So that's precisely where the danger lies. Danger is not in our communities, university students. I don't see that as any kind of a threat. On the contrary, that's what we need to help improve these models.
I think there's some interesting issues as well. One is, first of all, chatbots are really old technology generally. Most of us are most recently or most early familiar with, I should say, Siri. But really, chatbots go back to the 90s, the most basic forms, or even 70s, I believe.
Like Alice.
Yes. Yeah. So the development, I mean, the current trend is addressing very recent changes in the form of what chatbots can do, what they could not do before. The mainland's policy, as I understand it, encourages or emphasizes that a large language model should not be released if it doesn't demonstrate issues related to accuracy, transparency, moral justification, and so forth. And so some of this requires, and of course, massive vetting of the results of generated text. And of course, this means that there are people who are training these models who have to sift through a lot of, excuse my language, a lot of shit. Sometimes just the most abhorrent or vulgar or disturbing generations that they have to sift through and train the model to say, you shouldn't do this. So there are people who are definitely going to have to step up, and are probably, there's a massive human impact on those people. The other thing is, if this is successful, and I think this is a big if, right? Because the goal of training a large language model to be accurate is something that I don't think we have the ability to do right now, because right now it's language prediction. So it's assuming that the next word in the sentence should be this. And prediction is not the same thing as accurate generation of ideas. But if it's possible, which, you know, again, big if, then this will drastically change the whole landscape of large language models. And it will probably require at least some kind of response from American companies like OpenAI and DeepMind and so forth, and then a lot of the other companies in Silicon Valley who have just sort of been, you know, following this race to the bottom, that they'll have to actually create something that people can stand behind and say, this really is accurate. But this is a big if, I think, at the present.
Yeah, I guess just to add on to that, I do have some hope that diversifying like language and things is a good thing. I was thinking about the point about objectivity, or even your like rubric where it made comments about language and grammar, and I thought, yeah, that there might be dangers that if it's just exclusively trained on English and that's all we have, or a particular kind of English as well, there might be whole languages, but even uses of English that end up being valued less or not even represented. So I think there's a good aspect of it, and I hope that the other languages can be represented in these kind of projects too.
Yeah, that leads back to what you were saying about how there's sort of like reinforcement of bias in using chatbots. Yeah, thank you. So let's open the floor. We'll take questions. Can we move to the next slide? Thanks. And so if you're on Zoom right now and you'd like to ask a question, feel free to just type it. And thanks. I've been handed a thing. I will see your question. And if you're here in person, just shout out and somebody will pass a mic over to you, I hope. Yep, go ahead.
Thanks for the presentations. My question is for Professor Pietarinen. I'm also interested in the ways ChatGPT could be leveraged for like assessing and evaluating and grading student works. But I used it once, but I began to be concerned about whenever we input student essays into ChatGPT, we are basically like exposing student like intellectual property and privacy into the machine. So I was wondering, what's your take about like concerns on like student intellectual property and privacy? Thanks.
Yeah, totally. And we need regulations on that. We need guidelines. We need all sorts of further debates on what would be the, if that's right, if that's okay, if that's even good, then how to do it. Yes, of course. I mean, it's a question of course. This is an experiment. It's a research. Keep it confidential as much as we. Yes, there are all sorts of problems. Maybe there was even a violation of something. Of course, yeah. But we need to understand more how this works and cannot be used in some ways. Yes, of course, there are these property rights questions, legal issues, all sorts of host of issues included in that broader ethical questions of the proper uses. But let's just continue this debate on how to do it. Of course, you know, we try to preserve anonymity as much as possible and all of that. And we don't use that and nobody's using the grade student. I mean, it's structured grade student paper as long as we have any reason to do otherwise. So we will not, and teachers will not, and I hope no one is doing that to grade student papers. That's not what's doing. That's not what I was demonstrating. I was grading the papers first, and then I fed that anonymous data into the system to see whether it comes up with what kinds of grades it comes up with, and it's about 50-60% match, and others are slight deviations depending on exactly how you prompt and what your personal rubric has been and so forth, and just trying to understand that better will at least be some step towards starting the debate and on how, if any, you know, such uses this system presents to the community here.
Would Levi and Rachel like to provide or interact with the response or the question?
I think that's actually a really good question, and I think it raises one of these broader questions which a lot of tech companies have not themselves been able to address fully up till present, which is the fact that different countries have different legal regulations for privacy and intellectual property generally. So what might be the case here in Hong Kong may not be the case in the United States. It may not be the case in the EU. It may not be the case in the UK. Turnitin is a very interesting example, because if you find that a student's paper matches with a high degree a paper from another institution, you cannot just get access to that paper. They mask it from you. You can request access, but the instructor at the other university has to grant that because of privacy issues. So this leads to, it's a very good point. You know, you're raising this question that I think would actually be harder to address, because at present, ChatGPT and other LLMs assume that the person who's inputting the information is the person who is the owner of that content. But in this case, if you're giving student papers there into it, you are not the creator of that content. So this could potentially lead to really big legal issues.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. I guess I mentioned safety as well. And I think it's an important thing to convey to students as well, because I know students who've been encouraged to, use it to develop their own personal fitness plan or something like that, where you're inputting things like your weight, your health information, your age, very sensitive personal information, without really thinking, where's all this content going? So yeah, I think it's an important thing to teach, as well as consider yourself as an educator.
And there have been examples of national secrets being leaked by government agencies not thinking about what they were inputting. So this is a big concern, I think.
Yeah, thanks for three of you for the talk, and I learned a lot of details about the ChatGPT and education today. I have a kind of a general questions about how we now worry about ChatGPT in the society, but because I personally, my positions is kind of that I don't think we need to worry that so much in the sense of as a layman to AI, I don't know much about the technologies actually, but when I'm thinking back and also something that say all of I'm also doing something about privacy, and then I'm using the so-called iBeacon technology, which for those who don't know, iBeacon technology is a Bluetooth technology which use our smartphone download an app and then use the app in the teaching classroom and something like that. So yeah, I'm still doing this research and probably still do for 1 or 2 more years, but talking about back to 8 years or 6 years ago, it was still some new technology. And at that time, people still argue about whether we should say we should let students to use smartphone in the classroom or just ban their using on the smartphone and something like that. And then, of course, my example that I'm using here is kind of going in another way. That is let the student use the smartphone in the classroom, and then we design something that they can do in the classroom and something like that. And then, of course, also at that time, people wonder, smartphone seems to be something that they can use to cheating on the exam or something like that. And privacy issue is also another things as well, which now seems we still haven't really touched a lot about the privacy issues on ChatGPT, but I suppose one day it will come out as well. But I talk about so much about the iBeacon or smartphone issue is that for layman on technology, seems like that we are just keep on using some new technology, and when the new technology comes out, of course there are some worries. But usually after a while, after we know what it is, we just adapt, and then we'll use that in our teaching as well. Seems like that smartphone is just an example. If you go back even further before, like the Google search engine is also like that as well. So I think I don't need to go on about the examples. So I guess my questions will be, is there anything about the ChatGPT nowadays that is specifically, which is quite different from all the other technologies in details? Yes, but is there anything specific that we need to worry about when we are doing the teaching in university, and also especially in high school? Maybe high school is a little bit different because they are still developing, not adult, something like that. So I wonder whether my question is basically for all the three speakers. Do you think we need to worry about that, or just another technology like the smartphone, something like that? Yeah, thank you.
I guess on one side, I'd say I agree with you. Like these are issues that are old, and I remember when I was in school, the big panic was about Wikipedia. That was going to be the end of education. No one would ever think again. But very quickly, you knew it's a good source for some things, and it's not good for other things. And similarly with smartphones and things, I'm sure you don't let your students use it for anything in the classroom. It's a specific use, and I guess the value of having of there being kind of panic about ChatGPT is that we can have these conversations. You you mentioned how people adapt, but I think having conversations and having the panic is kind of how you come to an adaptation. So that there might be a good thing about like, oh, this is the new thing, how are we going to use it well? Those conversations and the way that we equip our students can move us more quickly to that stable place that we want to be with these new technologies. But on the other hand, I do think there might be some different things about this technology in particular. I think the reach and the speed and the novelty of the content, because with Google, even Google, you're still limited to what the websites are, or Wikipedia, or the articles that have been made. You reach an endpoint before, if you just keep Googling, you kind of reach an endpoint with, and then you have these tools that can track, where you've been and where you got the information from. I think with this, it's that sort of generative power that it can be different every time. It can tackle any subject if parameters haven't been set. So, and the speed at which it generates things as well, to me, that's actually quite different to all the other technologies that have come before. So I think there might be something that, requires special attention. Again, having the same conversations about how to use it well, but recognizing that I think it will be a lot of different uses, of bad uses and good uses. Whereas with Google and other things, they were a bit more specific in function and in capabilities and affordances. So maybe a little bit easier to get our heads around it and to use it well.
Yes, the point about technology is that it's not only dual use, but it's multi-use. So any worry is an opportunity. Any opportunity is a worry in various degrees. So we have to face that, and we are problem-solving machines, humans ourselves. So we just have to face these problems as we go along in this process. And technology has powers of its own that we cannot really control. It's not up to us to really decide much of this. So, any given Tuesday, there will probably a plugin to turn it in, and it would say that, yeah, you can feed all your student essays there, and for turn it in, it's okay, and we'll solve the intellectual property right problem, and there you go, and you are not grading the papers anymore as an instructor, but you are maybe verifying the student went through the process of improving their own learning, or whatever it might be, and it just happens. And then we have to solve other problems that follow as a consequence. So there are these unexpected consequences of facing us all the time. So, but it's a qualitative leap. It is something that comparable to maybe page ranking algorithm that Google had, or with Wikipedia. I was very skeptical in the beginning because it was not accurate. It was not quality. It was not good. It took about 10 years until Wikipedia got better, and maybe 20 years, and now it's something like 99% accurate. And ChatGPT was maybe 2 months ago somewhere like 80% accurate, but it's reaching now that 99% and plus, and it's just before midnight, it's probably catching up with what Wikipedia took Wikipedia 10 years to do this. We have these amazing emergent capabilities, competencies rising all the time, because so much of our human culture and thinking can be characterized as language in various forms, and that's just marvelous discovery. And of course, for science, that every linguist on this planet will rethink what they were thinking about language and how it works.
Sorry, right before Levi is going to jump in, can I sort of like ask a question, just sort of like a tag on, because both Rachel and Ahti mentioned Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has sort of been moving towards like a sort of because most of the people that are mentioned on Wikipedia and the sort of sources I've been cited are mostly from men, and they're mostly written by men, about men, for men. And so there are issues about like how there like this sort of reinforces the who's being cited and who's being known in world. And do you see that sort of being translated into ChatGPT as what's being fed into ChatGPT reinforces bias, as Rachel was saying?
Yeah, we don't know what the training data, pre-training data for these systems actually is. We know that it's anything from the internet and Reddit and they probably bought the data from sources that we don't know, and they will not tell. They need more data all the time. So at some point soon in the future, they will run out of actually the training data. There are just so many words, by now 1 trillion words been trained in the system. So, this is just, it just gobbles more and more data all the time. So needs that. So, I worry about Wikipedia. That was a big problem for long. It probably still is. This sort of gender. I remember statistics that is already several years ago that it was something like 90% white males, more or less, as the main editors. There's like a bunch of thousand editors that are controlling who gets actually to edit these pages, although they claim to be open. So that's one reason why they're less articles on supernovas and more articles on supermodules. So it is. So that's because we didn't get that quite right. That's why it's so important to try to get this one better.
I think the problem, one of the things that I really dislike about the large language models as this kind of question about the Benedict's asking, is this something qualitatively different? In some degrees, I think it's not, because I think, as Ahti and Rachel mentioned, we have these sources that people have used before: Google, Wikipedia, and I remember at one point when I was a grad student, it was a very fascinating moment for me to realize I was taking a course at UC Berkeley with undergrads, and because it was a Heidegger class, and because I was done with Heidegger, so I needed to take an undergrad class, and I of course had my PhD courses across the street. I remember noticing one time that the undergrads, none of them had their computers out ever, and my graduate peers always, like half of them, or more than half of them, took notes with computers. And there was a moment in this Heidegger class where there was a question about something Heidegger was talking about, and we wondered what it was. And we just had to wonder, we had to ponder, think about it. And about a day later, there was a similar question for a different thinker in one of my grad classes. And one of the classmates just immediately Googled it, and it struck me, like, what is the goal of education here? Are we trying to think? Are we learning to ponder, to sit in some ignorance, or do we need clear answers all the time? So this is one issue, I think, where ChatGPT is not a qualitative change. It's the kind of new variation, permutation. But a bigger issue is this question of trust. And I think this gets to kind of what Jillian was asking. When we assume that the answer that comes from ChatGPT, or the answer that comes from Google, or the answer that comes from Wikipedia is the correct answer. And this is something that we kind of teach students from a young age, which is unfortunate, that there is one correct answer. And of course, there is one correct answer for some disciplines, right? For physics, for chemistry, for mathematics. You don't want students trying to do the Pythagorean theorem and coming up with some answer like the categorical imperative, right? You don't want something like that. But with other disciplines, literature, philosophy, theology, art, there may be more than one right answer. And part of what we want students to understand is that there's not necessarily one right answer. I think this question about bias, right, gender bias, gets to some of that, because if we're only having the voices of people who look like me represented, then we are ignoring not only women, but also Chinese, but also LGBTQ, also religious minorities, also people who are neurodivergent. I mean, there's a lot of people whose perspective, experience, understanding, answers to these questions will be different. So even within ethics, right? As I said, we do this form essay of Mill versus Kant. But why are we doing Mill versus Kant? Why are we not doing something that is much more interesting? Why aren't we telling students to engage with Martha Nussbaum rather than Kant? Why are we not using Hypatia instead of Aristotle, right? We need to be starting to, I mean, and this is of course not a very long conversation. It's actually fairly recent for academia over the last maybe 40 or 50 years, the need to decolonize the curriculum. But the risk is that with AI, we get what seems to be a or the right answer. And I think we have to, as educators, we have to make students question that, to ask, this is a potentially right answer, but it's not the right answer. And that's, I think, the risk, because LLMs, AI generally are trusted as objective, as providing the correct answer, because it's a machine, it's a calculator. It knows what's right, versus me, a fallible human who after lunch is going to give my students a bad grade because I'm too tired, right? But that doesn't mean that the machine is giving the right answer. And we have to get students, this is, I think, one of the new obstacles for education, is to get students to recognize what is produced by the AI is not the only answer.
Thank you. And I think this will have to be our final question. Online, we have a CS department student, and the student asked GPT-4 can give some coding about the web scraping, and it can implement. So do you agree good students can easily find data set and analyze? It is because some data should use API to get the data, but usually API is not free to get. So is there some sort of barrier to access? I think the student is asking.
Well, I'm in favor of this in the sense in which, you know, it is extremely good in content analysis. That's what it is for. And it analyzes massive amounts of content and gets it about right by now. It's already getting it better than human experts. So, you know, these kind of menial tasks of the introductory part of a paper, or you know, so when you have to really summarize a vast amount of data that is out there, you know, you could use this to do that pretty well, and better than any human, really. And then you have, you know, most of the paper is spent for your developing your own ideas, and you will have plenty of time to do that if you don't, you know, spend everything on literature reviews. So in a way, that's, I'm not saying that's exactly good, or if we make this jump or transition too fast, it might not be the, you know, exactly the right way, and we might just make a mess out of all of that. But I don't see avoiding that happening at some point in the future. People are already doing this, students are already doing that, the researchers are already doing that, and you know, when it comes to this kind of, you know, what is the most is a content analysis and getting that part done with the help of new models.
Would you like to add to that?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question.
The question is now gone from me. So I would say it was more like something like data set that were available, but it's behind a paywall.
I mean, if it's behind the paywall, the student, him or herself, cannot verify, right? This is part of the problem. So the ChatGPT probably has access to this or a similar data set, depending, of course, on what the data set the student is looking at, the training data and all and so forth. But if you don't have access to it, you can't verify it. And that's a dangerous position to be in. And this is why I mentioned in my remarks, for researchers, this is something we have to be very critical of, especially given the, you know, for example, the verifiability crisis in sciences, that we have all of these papers coming out in Nature and Science and other high-ranking journals that cannot be replicated. And with large language models and other AIs where we can maybe simulate or generate data, that's going to create a problem if we're not being much more careful about vetting these things. And already there's a problem of people not being able to vet these things. So that seems to me to be part of the concern, is the kind of verification and generation of accurate data or accurate summaries. Because if you don't have access to it, then you're going to not be able to verify for yourself. Just as a, you know, as a sort of aside, right? There was an example of a few years ago, the Detroit police force in the United States, they were using facial recognition software for solving crimes, and they arrested this black man, for apparently robbing a jewelry store, and they detained him for 36 hours or 48 hours. After about 36 hours, they finally interviewed him. They pulled him into the interview cell, and they said, "Where were you at this time?" And he says, "I was at work." And they said, "This isn't you." And they pointed a picture from a surveillance camera, and he held up the picture next to his face, and he said, "Does this look like me?" And apparently nobody in the process of arresting him, booking him, putting him in the prison cell had verified with their own eyes that the picture from the surveillance camera was the same person standing in front, because they just trusted the computer to have the right information. And this is a great danger. So a lot of US cities now have banned facial recognition software for policing, because they can't guarantee that it's going to result in what they want.
Well, thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you so much for participating. Can we move to the next slide and also share screen? Thanks. So we have a lot of other things going on. If you've enjoyed this event, I'm sure you'll enjoy other ones too. And in our Center for the Sino-Christian Studies, we'll have on May 6th, we will have the 8th annual conference of Logos International Forum. And for the Center for Applied Ethics, on May 16th and 17th, there will be the 17th Symposium on Building Chinese Bioethics, and this will be conducted in Mandarin Chinese. And on June 16th and 17th, the Center for Sino-Christian Studies will have a talk on the questions of origins, contemporary science, philosophical, and religious perspective. And details of all these registration is all online. So if you just Googled HKBU REL, so for religion, and then just click activities, then it'll just take you there. And can we go to the next slide? Thanks. Yeah, so thanks for coming today, both in person and also online. I guess online, you're also here in person in a different way. And so we'll continue this conversation online. And so if you're interested in continuing conversations with our speakers, with our colleagues, and with our students, and there's more events going on, and there's also thought pieces that we post, both as videos or as written pieces. Follow us on all these different ways. And so we'll leave this up here so that you can like screen cap it or like scan whatever that works for you. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for coming.